I recently wound up some Joe Rogan fans.
Did you now?
You did.
I did, unfortunately. I made a video on Snapchat. I reacted to Joe Rogan's opinion that young, healthy people don't need to get the vaccine. And then also a video of him going back the following week and like sort of rescinding those comments. But when he rescinded those comments, in doing that, he kind of, and I'm going to paraphrase here, he said that when he makes stupid comments, it's because that's what he's like. Joe on the podcast is authentic to real life Joe. And more or less a quote, if you disagree with me, I probably disagree with me too. Essentially, what he was saying was that he doesn't necessarily know what he's talking about and that people shouldn't expect him to be correct.
Yeah.
And I felt that was a little bit irresponsible for someone with a massive platform to present his opinion as kind of like advice and then be like, don't take my advice, because a lot of his followers will take his advice anyway. Yeah. So I made a video reacting to that. Anyway, since making the video, I've had lots of Rogan fans bombard me, sending me insults, but also telling me about this fancy new science. You guys might have heard of it. It's called the immune system.
What's that?
When did they invent that? Was that last year during the pandemic? They were like, let's finally crack this.
Well, this is the thing. They thought that this was news to me, and funnily enough, it wasn't. No, so in the video, I said exercise doesn't stop a virus, Joe. Because Joe Rogan was basically presenting exercise as an alternative to vaccines. And I said, otherwise, they'd just be getting everyone to exercise, which obviously people are encouraged to exercise, but not instead of a vaccine. And obviously a lot of disagreements here are on semantics. And, in response to the advice that a young, healthy 21-year-old who exercises doesn't need the vaccine, I'm saying that the current medical advice is not that. The exercise alone just isn't enough to be appropriate preventative treatment in regards to this virus. But anyway, I thought it'd be interesting to dig into all of this stuff, to look at exercise and the vaccine, to look at exercise and COVID, to look at the vaccine in young people, why exercise helps, and why young people should still be getting the vaccine. Young people being, by the way, sort of young adults. Us cool cats.
I'm a young adult.
Yeah, you're a young adult. Look at you.
I'm a typical Rogan fan. Look at me.
No, I was about to insult them, but they're actually very nice people, except for when they're being mean to me.
Yeah.
So.
Well, they're not all nice people. I'm sure some of them are dreadful.
Yeah, but some
As
of them.
in any group. In any group, there'll be dreadful people.
Yes,
don't say that, because they'll be watching. They'll be all offended. Joe
Oh,
Rogan fans, we're all on your side.
I hope they know exactly what I mean, which is that in any group there are dreadful people. It doesn't mean that individual's a dreadful person, and it doesn't mean that it's because they're Joe Rogan fans. It just means there's a correlation between a number of people and some of them being awful.
But some of you are.
Great both sides logic, Luke. No, I'm joking. So on exercise. Exercise is good for you in a lot of ways. Obviously, it can improve your cardiovascular health, your metabolism, and also your immune system. There is a myth, though, you guys might have heard it, that intense exercise, suppresses your immune system for a short period after, like the sort of window idea. You've heard this, really?
Yeah.
That's not actually the case. So the thing is that this is a myth. On looking into it, it's a myth that actually seems to be prevalent in a lot of papers as well.
I was going to say, because I've definitely been told this by a trainer at a gym.
I was told it by my personal trainer.
Really?
But like, and I've even seen it in some of the papers that I was looking at for this. Like, literally, it's well known that this happens.
Wow.
I was looking at another paper, or a few other papers, and apparently that doesn't really seem to be the case. The sort of evidence that I find for it is that periods of increased heavy exercise in athletes is linked to temporary changes in immune system health. And it could be due to other factors associated with that, like traveling to different time zones, lack of sleep, low sort of calorie diet when they're doing that intense period of exercise. And it's specifically in athletes. So, and also like when athletes are doing that, they're exposed to more people. So you'd expect them to be more ill. I as far as I'm aware, that is not a phenomenon that is necessarily present in the general population. It's really intense exercise lowering your immune system. But again, if you consider yourself an athlete? Professional athlete, Luke. Professional.
Fake it till you make it.
But then, there's no dispute that really, like, we all agree that regular, moderate exercise is generally good for you. Right, it's a good thing. It's a net positive for your health and immune system. And let's be clear. Regular exercise is a positive indicator for having less severe COVID symptoms. That has been recognized as well. No one is saying that that's not the case. Not a single person. Genuinely, no one is saying that.
I could find one.
Find one, okay? It won't be me. So if we look at exercise and COVID, I found this study from April. This is like the most sort of recent study I can find. And obviously, this is really difficult finding studies because some of them are from 2020. And if they're from 2020, they're out of date, which is ridiculous because this thing has only been around for 2 years. 2020 could still be out of date, right?
Yeah.
So I was trying to find the most recent one that I could. I found one from April. And this study says that consistently meeting physical activity guidelines is strongly associated with a reduced risk for severe COVID-19 outcomes among affected adults. And they also recommend sort of promoting physical activity as part of treatment, essentially, right? So if we're putting people in lockdown, saying get out and exercise as well. No, you have 1 hour. You have 1 hour to exercise every day. You must exercise for 1 hour every day, or we'll come to your house and we'll beat you up. Something like that, you know. We'll do it. But honestly, with this government, they won't get around to the beating up. Really, they'll just say they'll do it and then hope everyone forgets.
Yeah.
Now, I need to point out that when they say that meeting physical activity guidelines, these guidelines are American ones, which is 150 minutes a week of moderate to strenuous exercise, like a brisk walk. So I want to point out that when people are saying, if you're young and you exercise, this it actually reduces COVID symptoms. The exercise they're talking about is not going to the gym necessarily. If you're walking for 2.5 hours a week, that's exercise. That counts. Yeah. That counts. So the bar for exercise here is what I'm saying is fairly low, right?
And anyone who does that more than that is an athlete.
No.
A professional athlete. They do it professionally.
No. They looked at a sort of a group of patients that had taken this sort of questionnaire to ask whether what their level of physical activity was for 2 years prior to the COVID-19 sort of outbreak pandemic dealy. And when you adjust the odds of death, essentially your odds of death are 2.49 times greater, and there's obviously some uncertainty there, but you can find all the links to all the sort of studies in the description. But 2.49 times greater for patients who were consistently inactive compared to patients who were constantly meeting the physical activity guidelines. So essentially, if you're meeting the sort of physical activity guidelines, you're 2.49 times less. If you're not meeting the guidelines, you're 2.49 times more likely to die than someone who is meeting the guidelines. So go and walk for 2.5 hours.
I was going to say that's a lot.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It's a lot, but it's also not a lot compared to getting a vaccine.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And this is the thing. And they also looked at people who were kind of meeting the guidelines and they were kind of in the middle. And there are some limitations here, right? So what you look at the study and you think, oh, well, that means that exercise itself stops you from dying from the virus. Not necessarily the case. There are some limitations, and this was in the study itself. You can read this if you read the whole study. I don't know if everyone that looks at headlines or articles does that, but
They definitely don't.
No, they don't.
No,
because actually, some of these studies, by the way, that I've got linked down here, were specifically sent to me by Joe Rogan fans. Of course,
I clearly didn't read it.
Well, yeah, of course I'm going to. Why would I not read them? Of course I'm going to read them. So in reading them, this is the kind of stuff that I found out. When you look at the limitations here say that we can't actually prove a link from this study between the exercise and the difference in chance of death here, right? Because it could be that it's not sort of causative. It could be the other way around. That if you've got more significant sort of underlying illnesses, you could be less likely to include physical activity in your sort of daily routines, right? So instead of exercise, meaning that you're sort of more likely to fare better against the virus, things that make you less likely to fare better against the virus could make you less likely to exercise, right? And this is the stuff that you need to put in your paper if you're not certain that it's causative. And from this study, because of the kind of study it was, they couldn't sort of prove a causative link from this study alone.
Yeah.
However, I said that they can't necessarily prove a causative link, but there are lots of studies that show that there are lots of benefits from physical activity, like we've just said, and that even includes people that suffer from any number of chronic diseases or complications that could affect COVID-19. So while this study itself can't prove that there's a sort of causative link there, the people that wrote it are saying, yeah, we can't prove it with this kind of study, but based on previous evidence, we could sort of assume or think that, right? So from the looks of it, it seems that exercise is a strong indicator for sort of dealing with COVID-19 better, right? Certainly, I wouldn't say don't exercise. I would say definitely exercise. You're probably going to fare better, especially because it's good for your cardiovascular system, and COVID can really affect that, right? And also your blood flow and all of these things that COVID can affect. And they're also sort of talking, not to rag on the Rogan fans again, but they were also telling me about age and obesity, that actually the people that were most affected were old people and people that were obese. And that's not untrue, right? So let's look at this, right? With obesity, the issue is, so I did some reading. Apparently the issue with obesity is metabolic issues. When you look at genetic markers for obesity, they're not as strongly associated with the bad outcomes as the metabolic markers, which essentially means that like, it's what obesity does to your metabolism, like how you sort of deal with energy in your body. That's what affects COVID more than sort of the genetic marker for just being obese. And in terms of age, it could be because the sort of people are on lots of medications for their comorbidities. It could also be because of their immune system aging. There's lots of different reasons that age and obesity could be sort of like increased risk factors here. But bear in mind that while age and obesity are risk factors, that doesn't mean that you're safe just because you're not, say, old or obese, right? One of the sort of risk factors here is like having a high BMI, right? That's how they're measuring obesity, and I'll get to that in a bit. But actually, being overweight is a BMI of 25, and BMI is not the best indicator of health. But having a BMI of over 25 is easier than you would think. It applies to more people than you would think, right?
I've seen people tweeting about how they're like really muscular, like they're muscular, like. Yeah. Trainers, like they lift really heavy weights and they've got really high BMIs, and it doesn't really indicate health.
No, BMI is essentially it does not tell you it tells you basically your weight in comparison to your height, essentially. Right, which is, there are different things in your body which have different sort of densities. So your muscle is more dense than fat. So if you have a lot of muscle, you're gonna weigh more. So that could skew your BMI. But just saying that just because it heavily affects old or obese people, that doesn't mean that if you're not old or obese, you're getting off scot-free, right? And let's just look at some stats for COVID, right? So in the UK, we've had 4.45 million cases, and the reason I want to bring this up is because I have had quotes for the death rate of COVID anywhere between 0.1% to 1%. None of those are right. Those are anything in that range is too low. In the UK, we've had 4.45 million cases, 128,000 deaths, which gives us a mortality rate of 2.88%. Yeah, awful. US mortality rate is 1.8%. So the mortality rate for this is, I mean, you'll often hear people quoting 1%. That's just not true.
Yeah, I've seen people saying, "Oh, a 99% survival rate virus." Yeah. Why do we need to do X? Why do we need to do Y? But that's not even true.
No, it's not true at all. No.
Wow.
And obviously the mortality rate is depends on where you are in the world, right? Depends on. I mean, there's some countries that have got much higher. Mortality rate, and this is the thing. Mortality is, if you're only looking at mortality when it comes to viruses or illnesses and their effect, or pandemics, then you're kind of missing a lot of the picture, because there's something called long COVID. Have you guys heard of long COVID? Yeah. So, look, this is the thing. I was looking into that. Now this is from the Office of National Statistics, the ONS. They did a paper on long COVID. It's self-reported. Now, just in this, it's long COVID is symptoms essentially lasting more than 4 weeks, but long COVID is not an official diagnosis. It doesn't have official symptoms or diagnostic criteria yet. It's just a general term that we use to sort of describe people that are affected by COVID for a longer period of time than most, have some kind of lasting damage to their bodies, or have a really long recovery period. So in sort of February, so there was, for 4 weeks before the 6th of March, essentially, they ran this sort of survey sort of study, and estimated that 1.1 million people in the UK have like sort of long COVID, and 20% of those people said that it impacted their day-to-day activities a lot, with fatigue, coughs, intermittent headaches, and muscle pain. So this is the thing, and it's hard to get the stats, honestly, on demographics when it comes to long COVID, but at least from what I've seen, even if you are young and not necessarily at risk, that doesn't mean that you're not at risk for long COVID. In fact, there's been a few articles that I've seen, and I wouldn't necessarily trust them fully, because I honestly don't know where they're getting the data. And when I say articles, I mean newspaper articles saying that, young people are the risk for long COVID for young people is rising. Not necessarily sure how they're specifically getting that data, but young people are not at no risk for long COVID, right? This estimate from the ONS, that only includes people living in private households. So that doesn't mean if you live, say, in halls of residence, prisons, schools, hospitals, or care homes, then you're not going to be included. Halls of residence as well. That's university students. That's a lot of people in that age group, right? So we don't necessarily have the full amount of data on long COVID for this age group. But from what I've seen, at least, it seems that you can't say, it's nothing, right?
Yeah.
And you see a lot of people talking about it, anecdotal evidence, obviously, but there are plenty of stories of people who are otherwise healthy that end up having these symptoms for a long time. But let's just move quickly on to vaccines. So long COVID is an issue. It's not just mortality. It's the symptoms lasting for a long time. Vaccines, I've had lots of people saying that they're not FDA approved, which they're not. They've been granted emergency use authority, which is essentially what the FDA uses to allow medical treatments and things like that to be used in emergency outbreaks and other situations like that. So while they're not FDA approved, the FDA sort of pored over the data for their safety and efficacy and studied it rigorously, so they could grant the EUA, right? So when people are saying, if you hear someone saying vaccine isn't FDA approved, no, it's not. But it is still approved. It's authorized by the FDA, right?
Yeah.
It's not FDA approved, but it's authorized by the FDA. And essentially, the difference between this, and I think this is something that it's very easy to misunderstand. So the difference between this is not necessarily sort of a lot of safety. In fact, if you look on websites describing this, it'll tell you that the difference is not necessarily in terms of safety. It's really similar to what we were talking about with the vaccine production. It's just that production kind of comes. They ramp up production before approval, essentially, right? So in normal FDA approval, with the FDA approval sort of timeline, you'd have the development, then the testing, then the approval, then the production, then the distribution. In this case, the production and the testing happen simultaneously, and then it's approved. And if it's approved, you've already got all the products, so you can just get it out.
Yeah, we've kind of talked about this before in our vaccine episode, didn't we?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they've given it an emergency use authority, which does not mean that it's compromised on safety. It just means that it can be used quickly to deal with this situation. As soon as the emergency is deemed as being over, the emergency use authority will be like sort of over. It will still have to have approval. If there are any issues where they determine that the value of safety is outweighed by the value, like the value of the safety that it provides is outweighed by the danger or the harm it can cause. Immediately, essentially, the EUA can be revoked. So those vaccines are not going to be sitting out on shelves if the FDA does not want them sitting out on shelves, essentially, right? And yeah, this is the thing. The vaccines are safe. We've done so many things on this, right? But the vaccines are safe. In fact, you know what? At some point, I'll put together a playlist of all of our vaccine stuff. If you want to have a look at that. The vaccines are safe. Let's not get too deep into it. Let's just quickly run over some of the stuff here, right? In the US, they've obviously got things to monitor the safety of the vaccines. They found 2 serious health problems after vaccination, which are what's the word for when you've got anaphylaxis? So there's anaphylaxis and the blood clots, right? And that's with the Johnson & Johnson / Janssen COVID-19 vaccine. And there's similar findings with the AstraZeneca vaccine, which isn't available in the US yet, as far as I'm aware.
Okay.
So it's basically these 2 things. You've got anaphylaxis and low platelet count / sort of blood clots. But these are very rare, right? So with the AstraZeneca, the low platelets affect sort of 1 in 10 people, but low platelets just mean you've got less of the sort of blood clotting agents. In fact, in the clinical trials, they weren't assessed. They couldn't sort of find the low platelets sort of with clinical symptoms. They essentially tested the blood, right? So what this is saying is essentially that you probably wouldn't necessarily notice. You're not presenting clinical symptoms or signs. They would actually have to specifically test you to check that you've got low platelets. And when it comes to the blood clots, that's been deemed as affecting less than 1 in 10,000 people. So what that essentially gives us is less than 0.01% chance of developing blood clots, an even smaller chance than that of dying from those blood clots, compared to a 1.8% chance overall in the UK of dying, or 1.8% chance overall in the US of dying from COVID-19, or 2.88% in the UK. 2.8. Yeah, so those don't really weigh up to me, right? Less than a 0.01 of just getting a blood clot compared to higher than that of dying, and then more than that of having lasting effects, right? The thing about vaccines, if they were less safe than the thing they are for, they wouldn't exist.
You wouldn't use them.
You wouldn't. And let's just quickly go over the risks for young people. So you'll hear a lot of people saying that young people aren't at risk from COVID-19. That's not necessarily true. Healthy young people aren't at risk. That's not necessarily the best way of looking at it, because again, this isn't just an individual thing. This is a society-wide thing, right? And there are some potential risks to young, seemingly healthy people. You've got complications like long COVID that could end up happening even if you are young and healthy. I've seen so many sort of reports of people who are otherwise young and healthy having lasting symptoms. Cytokine storm is something that could happen. You guys might have heard of this. Essentially, your immune system is functioning very well, and when it gets ill with COVID, it decides to function too well and
starts attacking itself.
Yeah, it could cause it could cause a lot of serious problems. So what I'm saying is that there's a low chance of this, but being young and healthy is not a get out of jail free card, right? You can't just think, oh, I can get COVID and be fine. It is far, far safer, even if you're young and healthy, to just get the vaccine, right? To just get it, because it is fundamentally safer. COVID can cause issues with blood clotting as well. You know, younger people can get sick enough from the disease to require hospitalization and die, even if they are otherwise young and healthy. Again, just being young and healthy doesn't mean that you won't be hospitalized. You've got a lower chance. Obviously, no one is saying that you're not, but you can still. There is still that chance there. If you're a current or former smoker, that's also a risk factor for adults, current or former smokers. I think I saw, as I was looking as well, I saw evidence that vaping as well can increase your risks from COVID. So if you think, oh, I don't smoke, I
do it the safe way.
I vape. You're not that safe, buddy. If you have underlying health issues like asthma, things like that, even ones that you're not aware of. Yeah, you've got asthma. And even if you're not, you can have underlying conditions that you're just not aware of. It would be the worst way to find out that you've got some health condition by dying because you didn't want to take a vaccine. And as I said, a BMI above 25, which is classed as overweight. And again, I would check your BMI, right? And if you're like feel comfortable with that, it is going to be higher than you expect, probably, because BMI is not necessarily intuitive. So yeah, like you could fall into that category even if you think you're fairly healthy. And the thing is, if you're young, you can still be at risk, right? The vaccines are safe. They're the best way to protect everyone. And the best way to protect everyone is to get vaccinated if you can, because the vaccines reduce your chances of sort of catching the virus. And if you get the virus, it reduces the severity of the symptoms, right? On average. And having a better immune system doesn't mean that you shouldn't get the vaccine. Having a better immune system, if anything, means that you should go ahead and get the vaccine, because I'll be fine with the vaccine, right? Because my immune system will be able to, the whole point of a vaccine is to give your immune system a practice round and to prepare it in a safe way. So if you come into contact with COVID, which you're seemingly not worried about, then you'll deal with it even better. And there's increasing evidence that the vaccines also reduce transmission of the virus. Right? This is something that is literally coming out now. All of the sort of papers I'm looking at on this are from sort of late April to May, coming out even sort of 1st of May. There is mounting evidence that the vaccine can slower reduce the spread of the virus, which would be great in terms of herd immunity, right? If we slow or stop the spread of the virus amongst most individuals, then we can basically wipe it out. And we're not all going to be safe from COVID until we've wiped it out, essentially, because as we're seeing, there's new variants going around, and you catching it and letting it sort of develop in your body, you're just increasing the risk for everyone for really no reason. Honestly, if you're worried about vaccines being safe, they are safe. It feels scary that they're sort of being pushed really quickly, but we've got videos on why it's fine. We've got I think a whole episode on why it's okay. Ultimately, look, here's the thing. Exercise is great. it is great to be healthy. The vaccine is also another way to protect yourself. There's no point in being like, oh, well, I'll wear a helmet. I'm not going to wear my shin pads. Wear them both. Be doubly safe, you know? Like, oh, I've got airbags, not going to wear my seatbelt. Use them both.
Yeah, why not?
Although airbags are less safe than you'd think. So maybe that's not the best analogy. But no, to finish off, honestly, look, the vaccine is safe. Exercise is good for you. And can help you sort of, and can be a positive indicator for dealing with COVID better. So the best thing to do is probably to get out there and exercise and get a jab in your arm. That's it. That's
good advice.
Done. Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
And yeah, all the links, if this is a clip, by the way, if a clip is coming out, which hopefully, Luke, it will be.
I'm assuming so. This is like a whole episode.
That's a whole episode, isn't it? There are like 20 links in the description to all of the studies that I've spoken about in this. I've even included some articles, some newspaper articles that summarize the studies in an easier to understand way. Definitely recommend you look at them because, this is what seems to be the general scientific consensus. Exercise is good, vaccine good too. Get them both in you.
Oh, good. Do it.
Whoa, there we go. Wow. That was a lot. If you enjoyed that clip, head over to patreon.com/Sci Guys where you can find the full show. Or you can stay here and catch up on old Sci Guys episodes. Or you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Sci Guys Pod to find out when we're doing more live shows.